Welcome back to another episode here on Beholding Art as Personal Development. Aldo here has, over the last couple of videos, introduced us to some new ideas, and today we're going to elaborate further on those. As always, previous videos, readings, and anything mentioned here will be in the description. Aldo, take it away, as today we are talking about a gift of art.
Thank you, Rob. This is going to be slightly different than the past two episodes because I'll be reading it as if I'm reading a piece of music. Because after all, improvisation is what is done to a piece of music, and it has to do with the interpretation of the person who's doing the playing. So just bear with me, indulge me. This is music, and I'm going to be reading this. Here we go. A gift of art. That personal development is a gift implies that art itself represents the abundance and the inexhaustibility of human creative gifts over time and throughout the arts per se. That art is uniquely personal and of crucial significance regarding one's psychological individuation is the purview of all I have written thus far. That indulging the visual and audio arts through experiential education is a form of overall intellectual growth that results in fulfillment, refinement, and satisfaction. The art form par excellence that defines experiential education in this case will be found in the realm of non-objective art. Why and how this can be achieved is what the YouTube channel Beholding Art as Personal Development will define and explain to engaged participants, its reasoned conjecture, its postulation. Experientialism is the term that generally means learning by experience and means learning about learning and about learning about the learner as well. I coined the term expressional learning to imply that experience and expression occur simultaneously in the human organism. That appropriate label for this nascent form of learning ought to be second-generation experiential education. Our approach, then, is to explore art in general and to specifically examine contemporary, non-objective art. The word contemporary is loosely interpreted as now, a sort of framework of the present. The now of experience is the when we are observing a work of subjectivity, a work of art, as it were, in its presence. The consideration of visual art to be contemporary to ourselves when we are with artistic compositions, not from their historical perspective nor aesthetic presumptions or art appreciation directives. I am implying that upon viewing non-objective art amounts to an intersubjective experience, for example, a now-we occurrence, as if there is no it, there is no you encounter, when what emerges is a nascent creative happening. As such, an observer, a beholder, can begin to interpret and come to express personal meaning. Meaning, then, is how one makes sense and articulates and discloses their understanding and involvement with an artistic creation, one's face-to-face experiential fact, no longer as a chronological category, but as a generic one, allowing for the creation and more personal meanings, less art institutional, less cultivated for captive audiences, more as overcoming linguistic restrictions, a possible new way to create new meanings. The worn-out question, what is art, seems to assume that art is an object, has a technical quality, has the artist's authority as to its so-called meaning. Is this appraisal so? If not, what does serve as art's identity, its legitimacy, its criticisms? Ought one begin to think of art as simply existing? That's your question. The conservation of consciousness, perhaps. Who's ever thought of that? In this way of beginning with it, being visually in touch, experiencing and expressing it, both perceptively and viscerally, is to live with it in that moment, a moment of co-creativity. Also, there is psychological space within the viewer which comes closer to that present moment in the form of memory traces, a sense of connection. In this interpretation, a beholder becomes a creative force, not passive, by opening to unconscious feelings, processes that contribute to shared creativity. Sparing of the artist's expression, sharing of the artist's expressed creative material and one's own fund of buried expressional material. One objective art, in particular, confronts our visual system to interpret images that are novel, out of the ordinary. Our nervous system has evolved to reconstruct novelty, to assimilate the new, a form of creative reconstruction, indeed how we learn, whereas sensations are considered to emerge from observation, perception, involves the rest of the human organism. The ambiguity of abstract images puts a greater demand on any viewer's imagination than familiar images do. We interpret what we see on canvas in personal terms. As a result, meaning is added to unusual visual compositions. Retinal experience, aesthetic gratification, and certain concept known as the biology of perception all contribute to the embodiment of an art experience. Subtle feelings and feeling tones, memory fragments, and newly experienced perceptions accompany the beholder's interpretation and meaning-making capacity, that is, evaluating and learning. The human organism abstracts. Abstracting is how biological entities process their environments. Yes, environments, plural, internal environments as well as external. Internal and external environments such as language to begin with, and a host of other phenomena that constitute environments such as audio, visual, sensual, semantic, and even fantasy environments apply. The human abstracting process is an experiential fact. Our nervous systems abstract subconsciously as well, signaling thirst and hunger, fever, etc., including intuitions and broad feeling continuums, for examples, mild annoyance to murderous rage, casual humor to convulsive laughter. Becoming aware of our capacity to abstract consciously is what the act of abstracting hopes to impart. Aesthetic processes, learning and naming processes, and how all personal knowledge is arranged in high to low orders of abstracting and levels of semantic reactions emerge as corresponding feelings and remembrances. That is the gift. Rob?
I really enjoyed the reading. I had already read it before and always stuck with me. The beholder is the creative force. Something seems really empowering about that. But I do have some questions because like I said, I read it. So I'm going to ask you now, can you think of an example where an artwork caused you to feel or think in a completely new way?
Yes, and by sheer chance, Kandinsky, Wassily Kandinsky, from 1911 to whatever date he died, was the granddaddy of abstract art. And he, in 1911, went to a concert and he heard Schoenberg's concerto or whatever it was, and it was atonal music. It was brand new. It brought in the whole era of modernism. It was called serial music, and because they knew each other and worked together, Kandinsky developed a language of how he paints. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I come from a music background. I'm not Schoenberg, of course, but Kandinsky started to paint based on music, and that's what I do. And that's why I was so impressed with it. And I still look at Kandinsky's art almost daily.
The symmetry there is undeniable, kind of the comparisons of art and music, especially when we're talking abstract art. And then I guess the other question, or one of the other questions I had, was you write that the human nervous system reconstructs novelty. How does the biological process, or that biological process, connect to how we interpret abstract art?
Okay. Again, because this is very complicated, I don't I don't presume to abstract, so I'm going to read it. The human nervous system restructures novelty through a combination of detecting unexpected information and forming new neural connections. Why novelty is encountered, distinct brain regions process familiarity and novel signals, which are integrated to create a surprise signal. This process triggers the neurochemical responses that enable adaptation. This involves different brain regions signaling familiarity versus novelty, a process that triggers neurotransmitted mediated encoding to form new neural connections and memories. Specifically, encountering unexpected events activates the dopamine and norepinephrine systems, which promote learning, motivation, and memory formation, while absolute novelty engages cholinergic mediated system. Dopamine and norepinephrine, these neurotransmitters are crucial for responding to novelty. They help encode information, increase motivation, and influence emotional responses. You'll see a lot of this in my work that doesn't create the kind of tongue-tying that just went on.
That's perfect.
And that's pretty much what the novelty. Let me go into another process because we mentioned neurotransmitters. Now, what I'm going to read now is an abstract, believe it or not, a small version of a much longer comprehensive article on neuroplasticity. That is to say that we can learn new things, just as stated, and it's done chemically, and it's done through these neurotransmitters.
That's the definition, or the neuroplasticity is the learning process.
Okay. Because I'm talking about memory that is invoked by the art, and that it is embodied in some way, is a point that I'm trying to make. And that must come through clearly, because everything we've been talking about thus far includes an idea, it includes an abstract idea that the body and mind are one and the same. So this has been tossed around by philosophers over the ages and continues right into brain science, right into what we're talking about here, neuroplasticity. So let me read this. It's going to be a tongue-tire once more. The efficiency of the memory system lies not only in its readiness to detect and retrieve old stimuli, but also in its ability to detect and integrate novel information. In this review, we discuss recent evidence suggesting that the neural substrates' sensitivity to detecting familiarity and novelty are not entirely overlapping. Instead, these partially distinct familiarities and novelty signals are integrated to support cognition, memory, decisions. We argue that different types of novelty, absolute or contextual, engage different neurotransmitter systems that converge in the hippocampus. I'm sure you've heard these words about the brain. We suggest that contextual or unexpected novelty triggers dopamine into the hippocampal region, and it's coupled with, let me say, other chemistry. And in fact, it mediates pupil dilation. Now, there's a connection with the body that is not totally mental. If your eye pupils are doing something, this is not a thinking process, although various ways of thinking will engage eye movement in many different ways, but that's in the later parts of what we're talking about. It'll come in the future. So I think I've made a case for novelty being something that is not only experienced, but can be re-experienced because it has taken place through the process of neuroplasticity. It's been merged with what you already know and can retrieve. We're talking about how you will retrieve it in the future with a little nudge from non-objective art.
Thank you, Aldo. Excuse us, we had a little technical difficulty, needed to turn some lights on as the sun was going down. You described something called second generation experiential education. What's new or different about this second generation?
What makes it different is that it's highly personal. All the education that we've all had has come from the outside in. When we're born into society, we learn everything by asking the question why. Mommy says this, Daddy says that. We start putting it together, and we're doing that by our own methods of putting language together. And I've been making the case that abstracting is the kernel of learning, and yet we don't know that we abstract. And then I also said that because it's so personal, it is part of our individual existence. There's no one like us. We are a one-time event in the universe. So we are in fact always the location and the event. So let me just continue with something else that came to mind, is that when we started this, you asked me about if any artists that I'd seen, and I mentioned Kandinsky and of course Schoenberg. But there are other artists in mathematics, artists in like Heisenberg and his uncertainty principle, and Kurt Gödel and his principle of incompleteness. And what I'm thinking now is that everybody who's hearing this is hearing something new. And how uncertain do you feel when you listen to me talk? How do you feel about new information? And everybody has let's call it a way of making something certain for themselves, a convincer strategy of some kind, or a way of saying, I don't want to hear any more about it. I've been making the case that a lot of who we are is embodied, and that some of that embodiment has actually been blocked out. I will give you a couple examples before I try to make it easier for you to accept what I'm saying. One of the examples about bodied information that sometimes we call blocked, sometimes we refer to it as well, there's various psychological terms. One of them could be how we repress. So, okay, you repress something. How do you actually do that in your body? Well, there is a way, and I'll be talking about muscular armor and all the ways that our bodies do various things. I'll give you two examples, as I promised. One is, have you ever seen a cartoon of a little boy who is standing there with his arms close to his sides and smoke coming out of his ears? What he just heard is mommy saying no. He's blocking his anger so that he won't explode. That's a block. It's a visual thing that the child does. It's muscular. And he turns it off quickly. Or he makes an attempt. That's what the attempt looks like, as this so-called block or this repression is occurring in the body. The other one is, can you think of a time when you had a lump in your throat because you didn't want to cry? That's a way of not crying. You do it with your own body. The lump in your throat is the evidence. Okay, so these are a couple ideas that I want you to consider how things become embodied. So let me continue further. Because every individual, every personality is individuating. That's what we do with our lives. As we grow older, we become more individual. So where do we get the information to individuate? Most of it is already inside of us. We can't be waiting for external information to be coming from the outside in, because some of that is contaminated. That's why you need to abstract your way out of it. After all, we all know that governments and various things come to be that we need to block out. So this blocking process I'm talking about, part of it is actually necessary, but there are parts that aren't necessary. That's what needs to be abstracted. What is important to you to individuate? How do you finally come to know how do you cultivate your own being over time? What has language got to do with it? And I think we were just discussing what should be the next approach to where we're going with this information. One of the things that we all have all over the world, different languages, and only human beings have languages. And these languages come to make meaning through abstracting. I've already tried to say that this abstracting process is you can hone it, you can get it to be more exact through looking at art that challenges your how you view things. Well, these new ideas that are coming in are going to have to be evaluated by people who are listening to this. How do you actually evaluate? Well, with language, it's evaluated through something called semantics. We all have a semantic reaction to different words. I had mentioned somewhere else, I think, that dirt has one semantic reaction. We know what dirt is, and that's a word that we made up to talk about dirty things and the ground and various things. And we also have high order abstractions. Some of them are so high order an abstraction that they're called conceptual abstractions, which is an oxymoron. The conceptual part is how we've made feelings. Now, we've made feelings of freedom and various other words which have been abstracted by us to make them more concrete. I'm wondering about other things, about your own sense of self, for example. What about people who talk about their depression, their self-esteem? All of these are abstractions that they have to make clearer for themselves. That's the objective of therapy, to get you more in touch with your own human organism, stuff that you've tucked away. Why tucked away? I'm saying that so-called, I've used the word tucked away, is a treasure. You just have to go back in and get your treasure chest of stuff that is you, that's going to help you to individuate. This is not a hard concept. I'm making, it's humorous to me to talk about something very, very serious, which in fact is blocked right in our own being. These repressions are alive. They happen in a way. That lump in the throat becomes something very simple that you become unconscious of. That's why it's unconscious or subconscious or whatever means. Sometimes we use the term the shadow. Psychologists have been talking about the shadow. These are all the things that we didn't find good for us. In some way, before we even knew what the meaning of it was, we were blocking and tucking it away. So this whole system now is going to be, for a short time, based on how we abstract language. Language is abstracted from a low semantic reaction and a low order of abstraction to a very high order of abstraction, which has a feeling for it. These high orders are more conceptualized. The more you conceptualize them, and some of this conceptualization actually goes into realms of fantasy. There's something called the faith community, and it has to do with believing. The abstracting capacity for the faith community is a very, very high order of abstraction, and so are all of the ideologies. So one has to wonder, where does the impetus to move from the ideation of something, and how does that move along this? The ideation moves in a particular way. It goes from just an idea to something that becomes so intense that it can be called a dogma. Now, we haven't learned how to move away from the dogmatic ideas into new ideas. But ideation happens on a spectrum. It goes from just a little thing, and I mentioned it about anger, and I mentioned it about laughter. You know, a smile is not the same as a belly laugh, for example. So there are various degrees of how we interpret what we're actually abstracting. So it's going to become important to know that semantic reactions go along with high order and low order abstractions. And I just gave you a couple different examples. One was with anger, And the low-level abstraction could be, I'm mildly annoyed. And a high-order abstraction is murderous rage. They're different, but they're on the same spectrum. Feelings like that are as well. There's the I'll begin talking about antithetical pairs of feelings. That is love and anger, pain and pleasure, trust and fear. So this is a little simpler way to begin abstracting complex things. But now you will have a scale that's connected to the human nervous system. We've seen how I've tried to express what happens to a little boy's nervous system when he's holding on to his anger or beginning to block it. And I've also explained that the lump into your throat is evidence that your body is involved with this blocking process. What are you blocking? You're blocking your semantic reaction. You're making it disappear. It will come into view as you follow some of the ideas that tells people, hey, I might have abstracted this as a kid and didn't know what I was doing. Some of the meaning that I've made, I may have left out a lot. Okay, so what have you left out? Ask yourself if it's worth doing this. I'm going to use an example of how the human nervous system is being abstracted by people who go to musical concerts. I'll bring up the word that you all know. The name is Beethoven, and I'll include all the rest. You include whoever is your favorite. Why do you go back? Does one go back and listen to this over and over, either recorded or in concerts? Because when that hits the human nervous system, there's no way to block it or abstract your way out of it. That's the beauty of it. The human nervous system is telling you why Beethoven is so popular. That's not an accident. That has something to do with the human organism abstracting sound as pleasure and all of the rest of the emotions that happen. You don't need to know what they are. You will go through your rainbow of feelings when you listen to Mahler, when you listen to all these other musicians who are speaking a language that tells no lies. Even mathematics has its lies. That's what Kurt Gödel was trying to tell you. Heisenberg had his way of saying, you can't be certain about anything. What you can be certain about is one's response to music. That is the kernel of my thought and how it relates to abstracting. The human organism cannot get out of the way of music. It makes people dance. It makes people think. It makes governments shut down music that has excitation about being free. There's music that really dictates freedom to the human organism without a word, with just a sound. So let's take our cue from that. There is absolute abstracting capacity in the body. Music is the proof, over and over again. What is not the proof and what is language. So we have to be careful of our language. When I'm saying language, I mean every language in the entire world. There was a time when cavemen were looking at each other and could see in each other's eyes, like I mentioned, the dilation of the pupils. They could see fear in a person's eyes. They can see friendship. All of these things were visually capable of being felt. There was no language. So I'm kind of going off the track here, but it is the track. We speak now, and we don't know what we're speaking about totally. So if we examine our language, it'll tell us something about the external environment and how people are talking to each other, and the internal environment. At one point, I suggested that I think I mentioned through that interview with Rob, I said, hey, we're continually using this process of abstraction all the time as we speak to each other. This is spontaneous creativity. I spontaneously am responding to questions that were asked of me a few minutes ago. I'm creating on the spot, and you will be creating when you ask me a question. So something as obvious as that's being missed has to raise the question, how is my own individuation being stunted because I can't grow, because my external environment has made it impossible for me to cultivate my internal environment. That's why we're going to be talking about language in the next episode. For sure, I'll have more examples, and I suggest that even if one wants to go on YouTube, there's a program on there that it's sponsored by General Semantics, and the name of it is Semantic Reaction. Look it up. Look it up on your computer.
We'll link that too. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, so I mean, this is such an integral part of a masterful, almost magical piece of writing by Alfred Korzybski, who was a mathematician, who turned his spotlight on language. It is the masterpiece, and it's called Science and Sanity, obviously enough. And his topic is abstracting. So take it from there. I mean, there's a lot of complex things that we've been talking about. One has to do a little research on their own. I've been doing it for 40 years. So I bring it to you, and in the next installment, we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Sounds good. Like I said in the beginning, and we discussed, we'll have links to written documents where you can better kind of familiarize yourself with these ideas. Those will all be on Aldo's website, where is also Aldo's art, actually. But we'll get into that later. We'll have some of those pieces kind of brought on to help demonstrate and practice these ideals that we're speaking of. So until next time, thanks, Aldo. Always a pleasure talking with you.
Okay, thank you.